And hello and welcome, everybody. This is Wednesday, July 28th, and this is Todd Nielsen with Clocktower Advisors, and you've tuned in to Talk About Your Community, which is a Monday, Wednesday, Friday LinkedIn Live stream that is put on every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 11 a.m. U.S. Central Time. That's GMT -5 for those of you who are looking in globally on us. Thank you for coming today. If this is your first time in the stream, would love to hear from you. Please use the chat channel. We love it when there's a lot of interaction on the chat, and certainly with my guest today, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation because they've got some really cool ideas to talk about that they're bringing to the world of online communities. So really appreciate everybody spending some time in here today and sharing your thoughts and ideas. Just a little bookkeeping, going forward. I wanted to look forward to our Friday stream, which is going to be with Martina Pocciarini. I'm sure I'm getting her last name very horribly pronounced, but she's done some great research work on digitizing events online, and has just gotten done with a great quantitative study around meetup.com. And has some interesting learnings and takeaways for us to discuss when we get together on Friday. So hope you tune in. I've got a lot of other great guests lined up going forward. I'm trying to think of a way to get like a listing up so you can kind of see, a month of scheduled guests as I've got them available. So look for something like that on my stream and on the Clocktower Advisors page going forward. Why do we do this stream? Well, it is all about online communities and how they intersect with offline communities, and especially the hybrid between them. And I do work with all kinds of organizations, large and small, with their community building efforts online, and how we use these online platforms to build trust, friendships, connections, meaningful interactions, and so I'm always welcoming of folks who want to talk about that. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, please reach out and say hello. And I think I'd like to go ahead and make an introduction to our guests today, both of whom, gentlemen, I've had the pleasure of working with for some time now. And Arik Johnson and Derek Johnson, brothers with Aurora WDC. Which is I'll let them explain what Aurora WDC is, because I'm sure I won't do perfect justice. But Arik, reading the website, I understand you're the founder originally, and Derek is the CEO. What is your origin story with Aurora WDC?
Well, thanks, Todd. And hey, Derek. Hey, Todd. So I started the company back in 1995 when I needed a job. And I thought, boy, if I don't do this now, I probably never will. And what's the worst that could happen? And so our original footprint was in the 12 by 25 foot square rectangle, I guess, on the eastern side of our mother's beauty salon in Chautauqua, Wisconsin, which is about halfway between Eau Claire and Rice Lake. And I was kind of anything for a buck, for those first couple of years. And it turned out that this whole strategic market and competitive intelligence thing that I was so intrigued by was something we could actually make a living at. And so a few years later, Derek joined the company as director of research, and the rest is history. I handed the reins of leadership to him in 2010, and I sort of went off to the mountaintop a little bit to ponder where the intelligence world was going in business from there. And then really it's in the last few years that journey down from the mountaintop has now sort of taken shape, and stakeholder reconnaissance communities are really the tip of that spear.
Yeah, and I really want to talk a little bit more about those stakeholder reconnaissance communities. But Derek, you want to give a quick intro for yourself and your background?
I will, and I'll just build on that real quick by saying, isn't a beauty salon in a small town like the epitome of a community in a sense? Our mom had 3 of them going once upon a time, all at the same time. She downsized, like 1995 when Arik mentioned the story getting started out of that rectangle in her former full footprint of the beauty shop. And we joke about it a lot because it's one of those not a garage story or necessarily a basement story, but it's a cool beauty salon story that we love to reminisce about.
I really love that. I mean, I think it's one of the reasons that I named Clocktower Advisors what I did, is that idea of sort of the village and the thing that people congregate around in that space. And and certainly something like a beauty salon or a place where people gather socially, that's the commons. That's where people meet, intersect, have conversations, and form those friendships that last through a lifetime. So I absolutely love that idea. Very cool. Very cool. Well, so just in disclosure, you guys are clients / partners, entrepreneurial cohorts, with some things that we're working on. And one of the things that I ended up intersecting with Aurora WDC on, and continuing to do some work with you guys on, is on stakeholder reconnaissance communities. And some people who live in the online community space may be scratching their heads and say, well, how's that different from an online community? What's the idea behind an SRC? Is it just a fancy term? I don't know. Arik, do you want to take a stab at kind of telling us about what you've got in mind with that? And we can delve from there.
Yeah, thank you. The entity that I sort of established in order to figure out what to do next back in 2010 is called the Centers for Open Reconnaissance. And the term is related directly to an observation I made. By the way, I'm a history undergrad. I pretend to be a businessman, once in a while, but I'm really a historian. And when asked a few years ago, not a few years ago, I finally figured out a few years ago what my particular specialization in history is all about. It turns out it's losers. I'm fascinated by losers, and at what point a contender became a loser, and that loss became inevitable. And then everything that I've done in the last really quarter of a century is based on this innate curiosity about how to reverse engineer that, so that the indicators of a loss can be made anti-fragile, to use Taleb's terminology. So it turns out in human anthropology, open reconnaissance is this non-digital process by which communities make progress and figure out how to allocate resources in equitable ways, and ultimately, create prosperity and peace and all the things that we value about our non-digital communities. So really, in thinking about SRCs, my hope is that by looking at all the stakeholders in a particular community, we can redefine what reconnaissance means for them in the online space as well, and connect people who do not have geographic commonality between one another, that sort of town square analogy you talked about a second ago, and instead that these tribal instincts that we so, stubbornly accrue to and sometimes dilute away from can be used as forces for good in the online world as well. And I think now is the time. I see what's happening in social media, particularly in the last half decade or so, and really the spite and venom that is part of what's going on in the online community world. That is very, not only counterproductive, I think it's a national security risk. And so, to be blunt, I think the future is stakeholder reconnaissance, and I think online communities is what gives them global reach.
That idea of the toxicity of online spaces, is something that's really interesting to me right now. I feel like as much as in the online community world, there's a cadre or a group of online community managers. A lot of them congregate around CMX and some of these other properties. I don't hear them talking a lot about the toxicity of social media spaces beyond just sort of like, check the box. Yeah, it's toxic, it's bad. But I think, we're running these online community spaces that have the potential to insulate people's viewpoints, to create sort of dangerously toxic atmospheres, to radicalize people, to encourage trolling behaviors. And I think there is a responsibility for anybody that's running, an online commons, whether it's, often a private online community, such as the ones that I tend to work in a lot and that you guys are building with me, or, more open, wide social media spaces that to be thinking about how those things have an impact on the social good and well-being of a country. I don't have a question around that. I'm just kind of mulling that over.
Yeah, Well, I'll just react to that by saying I think that online communities have been weaponized in the last few years, and the weaponization of that platform technology is not limited to public social networks. I think it happens anywhere you have trolls, who emerge in order to create a sense of hostility between people. And that's ultimately what SRCs are for. And the reason why they're so targeted is because stakeholders have an interest in the future that the community is focused on. If you take the couple of SRCs that we're starting with this year, one is known as We Exist. You mind if I promote the Wellness Check?
No, by all means.
If you Google Wellness Check Wednesday, this afternoon starting at 4:00, we're actually hosting a webinar, the next in a series of webinars for a group called We Exist, which really comes out of the Milwaukee professional Black and brown community, folks of color who are sort of struggling, particularly in the aftermath of George Floyd, with what's going on in the world of work. And that's a whole other can of worms that I won't, take the lid off of right here. But that community, those folks all have a stake in that shared future in a way that I have been a unique witness to, having hosted all of these. And I feel just really privileged to have been invited to eavesdrop on that conversation as they sort of work through, the emotions around that, so that they can figure out how to move forward together. And that's the bottom line. The bottom line with stakeholder reconnaissance is action. What are we all going to do? Let's stop talking and let's start allocating resources to produce a different set of results than what we're currently experiencing. And Derek, there's nobody better in the CI world than my kid brother in terms of talking about actionability. So I'll maybe pass to him.
No, thank you, Arik. That's humbling to have you, of all people, mention that. But I think what's interesting about what started to happen about 18 months ago when the pandemic hit was, companies were starting already, at least the good ones, to move toward this digital transformation concept. And that digital transformation is a buzzword still active in the business marketplaces that we all operate in today. Of course, it is within LinkedIn, in this venue also. But the acceleration of that process has amped up several orders of magnitude, I think, since the pandemic caused us all to kind of rethink how we engage. Take trade shows and conferences; they've had to move online. Take private environments, like Salesforce's Dreamforce conference that had to move online. They're moving now to a hybrid sort of situation. Some of these massive gatherings where people would get together and talk about whatever it was that was of interest to bring them together in the first place had to be digitized. And we may see that continue to ebb and flow depending upon the safety and security conditions that we all have to confront. But the reality is this is probably here to stay. At least the digital engagement concepts, a good number of them are here to stay for probably forever. And when you think about toxicity, I'm not a community expert, but from an actionability, to Arik's point of view, you have to find the right balance between having a community manager that can manage toxicity while also having that same community manager be able to manage actionability. And those are very different things in my opinion. And those community managers need to have mad skills to be able to get that job done, at least from the lens that I look at it from.
Absolutely. I can say from personal experience and working with a lot of community managers that there's a high burnout factor in that world, because you need a special person to do that work. They need to be both sort of the beat cop, tracking down, difficult personalities, counseling them, de-escalating situations, or, enforcing the rules, within that community. But they also need to be the person boosting engagement and trying to get people to as you said, to look to that actionability of what the community is about.
I mean, going back, just to add to that, Todd, going back to the 1980s and 90s, our mom, if she didn't like you, she'd just boot you out of the beauty salon.
Yeah,
there was no mixing words.
Not in my store, right?
She would say, not physically in my venue, Nowadays, it's more difficult. To your point, there are trolls that are sometimes hard to understand and hard to have them leave in a cordial, de-escalating sort of way, right? And I think that it's going to be one of those situations that's a little bit tough to manage, but the really good, really effective community managers are going to rise to the surface, and they're going to be in hot demand.
Absolutely. I think this is digital maturity as well that we're seeing happen right now. Like we're in the midst of, we keep, I think it's easy to think in a very jaded fashion, like, oh, we've been at this online thing for a while. We're still like little kids at this stuff. And so I think like there's still an apprehension, I think, among, many who are, feeling like they're being picked on in online spaces. Like you can't say that here, or you can't. They're misunderstanding the difference between free speech as something that's guaranteed by a governmental entity and something where they're on a private platform and saying something, as like a Facebook or like a private online community. I don't have to let you stay or say anything. There's no freedom of speech for you. Like, yes, we want you to be in here and to be participating, but if you're damaging other people's experiences here, if you are having a negative impact on the actionability of that community space, I don't want you here. Goodbye.
Yep. Well, and, to your point about that, Todd, I think there are tools emerging in the, really last 18 months that I think will be disruptive to that status quo. And particularly, one of the things that, we're working on is the tokenization of behavioral tokenomics, I believe. And I'm going to take credit for coining that phrase.
That's a new term, man. Yeah.
This notion of behavioral tokenomics, that you will issue representative stores of value based on the equity that people have in a community. So why should it be that a troll who disrupts and poisons the culture of that community has more influence over where the community goes than 1,000 people who want to see the community make progress? That's just ridiculous. It's silly. And there are now tools, and these are all sort of based in distributed ledger and decentralized finance and the concepts around, the blockchain, and more importantly, if you haven't heard the term hash graph, the hash graph, which technologically is 10,000% faster than the blockchain in terms of computational intensity.
So it's not a controlled substance, the hash graph. It's
no, the hash graph.
Got it. Okay.
It's a controlled specification. Actually, the Hedera Foundation Council controls the Hedera hash graph, and it's interesting to look at that as the fungible token marketplace where money, fiat dollars, I should say currency units, because people in the crypto world are very particular about their nomenclature. The currency units that we call money, average people call money, are transformed into tokens that represent stores of value and transactional ability. And so as we see this, Aurora is in the process now of launching its own non-fungible token system called Kinetic Coin, which is specifically directed at making action something that we can represent equity around. And that equity buys you access. That equity earns you the right to have influence and status and power as a result of your investment, not in your own reputation, but your investment in the community's actionability. And so we're now seeing these permutations of how that token system can ultimately have very powerful social effects. And this whole sort of behavioral tokenomics topic is probably how I'll spend a good portion of my next couple of years is cracking the code on that.
So if I could perhaps grossly get this wrong and try to restate the behavioral tokenomics piece of it, the way that I relate to it is I see it as an extension and enhancement of what we've typically put into practice in communities as a gamification approach, where based on your behaviors, we're rewarding those behaviors with a virtual badge or with points or putting you on a leaderboard or something like that. And people in those community audiences react to that variously depending on what the community happens to be, because they may see it as something, they may look at it very dismissively and say, I'm not interested in fun games. Why do I care if I liked something? But attaching some kind of crypto token as a means of reward of good behaviors, and those need to be significant behaviors, attending a course or earning some certification or getting some tangible result that means something in the community, that then becomes not only some points that are on in some leaderboard somewhere that I don't care about, but some means of coalescing or representing my influence within that community in ways that I could express it, to vote for going in certain directions or to crowdsource certain kinds of efforts, or this is all new space and we're still thinking about it. But I think that's what excites me about it, is you're talking about what that actually means.
And I think the term that I'm very focused on is the representation of equity. The representation of how much of your stake in the future of this group you have cast together as opposed to pursuing independently. And that's how, regular money, currency units, traditional currency units accrete to whomever is performing the most rewarding activities that the rest of the community values, right? Your normal job, if you're working in a private corporation or a public institution, you're paid on the basis of how valuable that particular set of tasks is to the organization or entity at large and the people that they serve. Why doesn't it work that way online? The reason it doesn't work that way is because currency units are very, very highly regulated. Non-fungible tokens are not. And so you can represent this level of equity with a tremendous amount of greater versatility. And that's where the tokenomics come in. It's still based on fundamentals of economics like scarcity and value and, resource allocation, and all of those things are still present. It's not apart from economics. It's that you're using something that's new, the token, to represent the level of importance it has to the rest of the stakeholders.
And for those of us who are newbies to the cryptocurrency world, my understanding is that there's two directions with this. There's actual cryptocurrencies and crypto tokens. And
I would say there are
two different animals.
They're all tokens. They're just either fungible. In other words, they can be converted in a liquid way to fiat currency units, dollars, yen, yuan, euro, etc. Or they're non-fungible, meaning that they have representative value that is based on who else is trading in those tokens. And so most of the non-fungible token examples that we see are related to unique pieces of art, or you may have seen that they're now applying to athletic autographs and entertainment products that are one of a kind. I even heard about, there's a painting that just sold, I think it's currently about 18,000 US dollars is the equivalent US currency units, for a painting that only exists in the mind of the artist. The artist has not actually made it available for anyone else to see yet. So, I mean, the whole NFT world is kind of bonkers, but at the same time, we're basing this on a system called POAP, or Proof of Attendance Protocol. At least our first generation POAP tokens are based on proof of attendance. And that allows us to use participation in past events to represent equity in future decisions. And then the other side of that transaction is known as quadratic funding. So if you have 25 Kinetic Coin from participating in a webinar series for the last couple of years, and I have 2, that means you have 12 and a half times as many chances to have your will expressed in a quadratic funding question down the line. And then as you accumulate those tokens, that influence then rises relative to everyone else in the stakeholder reconnaissance community.
I think that's a far larger topic for us to discuss, and I definitely want to have you back on, because I know we're getting a little low on time here for the show. But maybe what we can do is, I know you had shared with me a great YouTube video explaining what quadratic funding is. I'll include that in the chat afterwards. If you've still got it handy, I can grab it and drop it in for anybody that's interested in learning a little more, because I think it is a super important element of what we're trying to do with the tokenomics approach, and I'm excited about that. Derek, if I could ask you a question, as far as a CI firm, Aurora, why stakeholder reconnaissance communities? Why getting into tokenomics and all of this? Like, what's what's the rationale here? Because isn't competitive intelligence about sort of helping individual companies do things, and now you're building communities, just to set that up as a straw man for you to knock down.
Yeah, of course, we're in the business of being an operator for our clients or our treasured customers, and helping them, uncover in an ethical manner, certain strategies and tactics that competition is using or other market actors are using, and no doubt that will continue. But there's an old saying in our space that 80% of what you might need to know about your competition, your marketplaces, is present inside the heads of somebody inside of your operations. So that old principle, which is decades old, fits really well into this SRC concept, because if you can connect, think of it as essentially a subject matter source network identification problem. If you can connect the right subject matter experts who are already being paid by your organization and incentivize them to share what they know about competitor X or market strategy Y or any number of other forces that are going to help your company be more competitive in the future, be more innovative in the future, whatever it might be that you're talking about. That reconnaissance community that is formed, in essence, then creates a stronger apparatus for intelligence and insights inside the company. And that's one reason why I think it's such a natural fit for a firm like ours to help private organizations as well as special interest public entities like the one Arik mentioned, We Exist, or various other nonprofit organizations, be able to have this concept of equity understanding and displacement for equitable interest sharing amongst these communities. That's a really big, bold, and audacious, in a sense, community aspect or strategy, right? But it's also something well within the grasp, and it's frankly the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to bring these communities together and do it in a way that can serve the interests of both the private enterprise as well as the public good.
Well, I definitely want to have you guys both back on to talk a little further about that, because it's a fascinating topic, and from what I see with SRCs in my admittedly imperfect understanding and evolving understanding of how these things are working, they can work both internally, within an organization, to help them be more situationally aware and actionable in some of the decisions they're making, especially with some things like some of the intelligence tools you bring to bear, around that, as well as with these external social good organizations like We Exist that we mentioned, which is about dispelling the talent myth of there's not enough diverse talent in the Milwaukee area, which is bull, and trying to reduce those pay gaps. In both of those cases, this is something that's beyond an action-oriented or activist kind of community that I think most people from the community management world might recognize, but something that is actually arming people with situational awareness and then awarding actions and behaviors, turning those insights into action is really kind of what this is all about.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, man, I love it, guys. Arik, you said earlier that sort of the crypto world is sort of bonkers. There's all kind of crazy stuff going on. I want to be where that energy's at. Bonkers
Right.
is sometimes a good thing. A lot, good comes out of those sorts of fuzzy spaces, that we play in. And I'm really grateful for the work you guys are doing, and that I'm a part of it.
Well, one last point, Derek, you'll remember when I called you in late March of last year, and we were we were pretty well set up for this whole pandemic lockdown thing. Everybody works from home at Aurora. We got rid of our last office a year before that, and I called Derek and I said, we're about to make 5 years worth of progress in the next 5 months, and it turns out I was wrong. It was the next 5 weeks, and so that's really what's happened in the last 16 or 17 months. Is we've made a decade's worth of progress on the fundamental science and tradecraft and doctrine behind strategic market and competitive intelligence. We've made a decade's worth of progress in the last year and a half. And I feel as though we're a little bit out and over our skis, frankly, to be honest. And that's kind of, to your point, Todd, it's bonkers. It's where we want to be. It's where the life is. That's where the future exists. And the analogy I've used with everybody in the team is this already exists in that future. we are clawing that future into the present. We're ripping the future into now. And I will take any invitation you have, Todd, to get together again with you and my brother to talk about that. It's super fun.
Fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you both so much for being on the stream with me this morning. It will be the first of many conversations, I'm sure. And for those of you that are watching live or catching this on the replay, if you've got questions and want to get in touch with Derek and Arik, they're both on LinkedIn, and you should reach out to them directly. Or if you wish to know more about Aurora WDC, you can visit them at aurorawdc.com. They do fantastic work. They're great guys to work with, and I appreciate our future collaborations that are coming up with this. A quick shout out. I see Jenny Wiggles on the chat this morning. Great to see you again, Jenny. I know you're back from some travel, so I appreciate you rejoining the stream. If you're catching this on the replay and you've got a question or a comment, please do add it to the chat. I do pay attention to that. I try to answer everybody that jumps in, and we'll also add some resources, as I mentioned, about quadratic funding to this as well. Please rejoin me on Friday at 11 a.m. Where I'll be meeting with Martina and talking a little bit about digitizing online events. You may have noticed that we've got some additional branding on the channel today. I did go ahead and upgrade StreamYard, and so I am now simultaneously streaming out to YouTube, just so that there's an archive out there, an accessible way for people to catch shows in the back catalog going forward as well. And I may end up putting it up on Facebook or Twitch. I don't know if we've got some folks that would be interested in seeing that. If you are, please drop a comment down below as well. In the meantime, I wish you all an excellent day, something productive. Be sure to take some time for yourself and relax, and I will see you next Friday. Derek, Arik, thanks a lot.
Thanks, gentlemen.
Todd, thanks again.
Bye, Derek.
See you guys.